Hi, how you doing?
Hi.
Yeah. Oh, it's
I don't wanna-
too long from Columbia. I was thinking even.
Harvard.
I might even.
Cornell. Claudia Pineda. ¿Cómo estás?
She had to stay home. Yeah, she might have it.
Well,
We're gonna have a gospel festival.
I will be there. All right. Oh, really? Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today's Brownbag, Dr. Diego Vigil. Dr. Vigil is a professor in the Department of Criminology, Law and Society here at UCI. He also has a joint appointment in Chicano Latino Studies. He's been at UCI for the past 9 years. Before coming to UCI, he was at USC for 6 years and for 14 years and UCLA for 6 years. He received his Ph.D. in Anthropology from UCLA, and his areas of expertise are in urban psychology and socialization, educational anthropology, and Mexico and U.S. Southwest psychology and socialization. Also, while at his time at USC and UCLA, he was director for the Center for the Study of Urban Poverty, chairman of the National Center for Gang Policy, director of ethnic studies at the University of Southern California. Most recently, he was a visiting professor in the Graduate School of Education at Harvard University. He's the author of 6 books, one of which was just published in the past month or so, and between 40 and 50 articles which have appeared in the Harvard Educational Review, the Annual Review of Anthropology, and the Educational Forum, too many to mention by name. In the past several months, again, he published another book and an article in the Journal of Education for Students Placed at Risk with Gil Conchas of our department. The title of that article is Multiple Marginality in Urban Education, Community and School Socialization Among Low-Income Mexican Descent Youth. He also acts as a consultant and expert witness in cultural defense and gang-related homicides. And he's also a great mentor. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Diego Vigil.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction. This is a book that just came out. It's the thinnest I've ever written. But I specialize in thin books. The story I love to tell is I'm at an anthropology conference, and one of my associates from UCLA is going up the escalator, the escalator. She looks at me and says, "Hey, I just saw your skinny book." And I turned around and I said, "I specialize in skinny books." You know? Because after all, you want people to read what you've written, right? Back in the 19th century, they had this, encyclopedias. And even now we have people that write 400 or 500 page books, which are well received and scholarly and all that kind of stuff. But today, not necessarily that I'm catering to publishers, but today publishers are looking for skinny books because they know it won't cost that much to produce it, and they also know people might use it aside from libraries and a few other places like that. They might use it in the classroom. So a lot of presses are going for books that can be turned into a paperback right away. Not just hardback for a year and see how it sells and then maybe turn it into a paperback. Anyway, today's presentation is the title of the book, Gang Redux. Am I blocking anybody? I guess on this side. I'll get out of the way eventually. Every now and then I'll step aside. And it's about a strategy that I've worked on for many decades now that includes schools, because I was a public school teacher back in the 60s, and a lot of my research emphasizes education. Irene just mentioned one that came out with co-author with Gil Conchas. We have a series of other articles that we're working on, plus a book which has a very novel title, Street Smart, School Smart. The variation among students in low-income areas, some that do well, others that do not, and why, and so forth, and all that kind of stuff. So we are writing that, and I've already gathered a lot of data. But this one here is something close to my heart, and it's something that I believe we sorely need in our society, a kind of strategy that's more in tune with human development frameworks rather than just trying to be punitive and suppressive. This particular framework is something that emphasizes prevention, intervention, as well as suppression. Suppression is what you get from law enforcement and from law and order public that's always clamoring for, straighten those gang members out. They have these new rules and laws, gang injunctions, and I'll tell you a little bit about that if we get a chance. But I don't want to talk too much because I want you to ask some questions. We're only here for an hour, right? And hopefully I'll talk for a half hour and then you guys can ask questions and we can have a nice discussion. Now, this is something that makes good sense to anybody that wants to seriously address the gang problem. Mixing intervention, prevention, and so on in law enforcement as needed, and addressing from the beginning, from the gate, that poverty and marginalization is a part of this. It's not something like children are born and some say, I'm going to take the conventional route, and now I'm going to be an unconventional, I'm going to be a gang member. It's a matter of living conditions, the churning kinds of vicissitudes of marginalization, being left out in the cold. And I'll specify that in a minute, the types of marginalizations that I'm talking about. Raised in the streets, I mean, you're street socialized. That's an important facet of this. And we all know about home socialization, school socialization, but this is something that addresses street socialization. Anyway, we want to cut that kind of socialization right at its roots in order for it not to blossom into a full-fledged street identity, gang member, hardcore. There are many kids that are kind of just peripherally involved in this socialization and involvement in gangs, but too many of them, unfortunately, get hardcore, very young, very early on the streets. Here's one of the photographs of the 1960s, the style of that era. Some of you, well, none of you here go that far, just a couple of people, but maybe very few in areas where this guy has a hairnet on. Or is it this guy? This guy here, yeah. At that time they were using hairnets because they cut the hair real short, 1.5 inches, 2 inches. Then they had to put a hairnet on it to keep it tight. Nowadays they don't have anything, it's just bald. They've gone completely in that direction. That's the style from the 60s, the sweater, the Pendleton shirt, the khaki pants, and so on. Now it's all a completely different style, which I'll show you later. And one of the things that I emphasize in this particular book and strategy, the historical roots and background of each ethnic group. That way you get an idea of when they came to this country, when they began to maladapt, and also begin to have difficulties with their families and also with schools. I have a framework I've developed. Irene's used to it. Anybody that's had my class is probably sick of it now. It's a complicated, but actually it's very simple. It looks complicated. It's a multi-dimensional type of framework. You're not going to see the black writing, unfortunately, and so we'll skip all that. But it goes back with big arrows here and moves to the right with smaller arrows. And it's not that I'm de-emphasizing the social psychology. I'm just putting it in perspective in the context of historical and structural forces that have shaped certain populations that have spawned gangs, okay? They're all tied together. And one of the first things you know about gangs is the neighborhood, ecological, right? And that's where place. And the Chicago School of the 1920s had this theory called the interstices, areas between the core of the city and the outlying areas. The interstices, they use that word. And I've applied it to some of the neighborhoods, barrios and ghettos that have been settled. And again, those are the areas that have the biggest kinds, the oldest kinds of gangs in the Southern California area. So place is an important part of it. When people come as immigrants, they come and they settle in a particular place. And usually it's a place that's, if housing there, it's substandard housing, housing that's been used up already and it's seen its better days. So the plumbing and all the other amenities associated with the house are not the best. But the other difficulty is socioeconomic, their status. So place and status are the first two areas that I focus on and that people, I think, should focus on to understand and comprehend the complexities of the gang problem. And then from there you go on to the social control, break down the social control, which includes family, schools, and law enforcement, all right? Because let's face it, schools are a social control institution that goes back to at least the 19th century, maybe earlier in certain parts of the world, and also today probably spread all over the world. And then that's a particular area of concern and focus for some people, looking at how social control unravels and another kind of socialization takes over. Street begins about here. But in addition to that, you learn about the culture of the streets, the gang subculture, the street subculture, and that's where you learn about cultures, okay? And then the social psychology means the individual, the personal. So you have the social identity here and the personal identity here. And the arrows go from left to right, showing the sequence and how they're weighted. That's the idea of multiple marginality, and the article that Gil and I wrote emphasized multiple marginality. I've used it many times before, and it's something that makes good sense to me, and maybe because I'm an anthropologist, and we're always looking at things holistically, you know? Or maybe also because of the way I was, what I read and what I was trained and what I saw out there in the reality of the streets. There's multiple levels to it, and they're linked together. One thing could affect another. For instance, if you're poor and you live in a house that's run down and small, and you have a big family, where do kids go for privacy? Outside. Classic example is one of the audios that I'm familiar with is Pico Union, which was not a audio in the 1920s. It was the condos of the 1920s, where a lot of the white working and middle class lived as they worked on Wilshire Boulevard, the business corridor, and also downtown Los Angeles on Broadway. So that was their neighborhood. And that was the 1920s, but in the 1960s and 70s, those houses had sort of fallen into disrepair. And there are roughly a lot of 4-story apartment buildings in that area. I've done a lot of work there and visited them and all that stuff, and it always blows me away when I walk towards these apartments and I don't see any people on the streets. I see cars, of course, and the main avenues there. Then I walk inside the apartment, I see kids up and down the hallways. This is their backyard, okay? And they're playing there with the toys and the dolls and the whole routine. And a whole social world there, just in the hallways of in the landings and stairwells of some of these apartments, and the rooftops. So gang members there, the Manasala Truchas 13 as well as the 18th Street, reside in those areas, and they are in those apartments. So where do they go for privacy? Outside in the streets, alleyways. Some of the schools that have hidden corners where a nice little oak tree where they could hide under the shade, get high, and blah, 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 do the things that gang members do. So that's an example here of its effect on something of social control. I mean, you know, how can parents control if their kids are outside? If they're so tightly crowded together. One gang member told me, he says, at nighttime, all the family members come, family and friends come in from all over, and they sleep on the floor. So he has to be real careful when he goes to the bathroom. He's got to tiptoe around, make sure he doesn't step on a relative, you know. And it makes a joke out of it, you know, gallows humor type of thing. But it's a reality, and that's something that I need for people to understand, the connection between these larger arrows and forces and the linkages with the ones on the right. Okay, any questions on this? I'm going through it rather quickly. I could spend a whole class period talking about it, giving, you know, sort of a verse and page for each of the theories there. There's about 5 gang theories. I mentioned these 2 of them, the interstices and strain, which is status, and then social control, and the subcultural thing, and then also street identity. Any questions you might have? Because we've written in our recent article, and I'm writing something else that's in another article that's going to sort of expand on this, the social psychology, and that's when I get into the stuff's not even out here. When I get into the psychosocial moratorium, something that Eric Erickson has written extensively on, and I've used it to apply to street kids who go through a status crisis of childhood to adulthood, known as the teenage years, and they develop different kinds of identities, the street identities. Here's cops stopping gang members at a housing project and sort of, you know, handcuffing them. Very common sight. One of the things I have to tell you in my ride-alongs with the cops, this doesn't happen too often unless you have 4 or 5 cop cars, because they do not go in their one cop car, because there's just too many gang members, too many older gang members that don't give a shit, right? So you get into some confrontation. So they have to go in 3 or 4 strong in order to pull the law and order card on these youngsters. But that's a very common procedure, sort of lining them up. We must focus on the social neglect and all the rest of the stuff. And the multiple marginalization that I mentioned, human development. And human development will include physical, social, emotional, and cognitive. The different developmental phases that youths go through and how they apply to young kids growing up on the streets. That segment of the population that I'm talking about. Here's some of the social programs and school efforts that have helped. The one on the bottom is a continuation school in East Los Angeles called Ramona. And Juan Munoz did his dissertation on that, but he went to Texas Tech. And within a year, he became assistant to the president. He's one of those administrative types. Very smart, very good research, but boom. Within 1 year, he's already, writing checks for people. He wrote the dissertation. He calls these schools here someone else's work. He cites, of course, but he calls them soft jails. And the funny thing about it is there used to be a special continuation school in East LA for boys called Jackson. And all my brother-in-laws and their friends used to talk about going to Jackson. That was a big thing. It was almost like a status thing. Where are you from? I went to Jackson, Andrew Jackson, okay? So, and in South Central where I grew up, it was Reese, Jacob Reese. That's the special school there. But the fun thing about Jackson, LA Unified School District took it over and they converted it to an elementary school. And in the process of converting it, in the cellar of the school, they found a jail, right? They found a jail. In other words, some of the kids that misbehaved at Jackson, they probably got them and threw them in there before the probation and parole office showed up or the cops, because they were still acting out street behavior. So a jail, and I got that from a good source from LA Unified School District. The young ladies in top. This is a cheerleading team from Pico Gardens Housing Project, not Pico Union, Pico Gardens. This is more property East LA, and it's a mix of Chicanas and Afro-Americans, and they're so cute with their little lips painted red, marching around and doing their thing. And that's something that the community developed on their own in legion with the school district when they have certain kinds of ceremonials. In this case, it was the 50th anniversary of the projects, and the girls came out with their nice white blouses and then pleated skirts, and they went up marching around up and down the community. And it was a very lovely affair. And those are the kinds of things I'm talking about when I get into my time, place, and people breakdown of how we could develop new strategies to deal with kids that are wayward and gang. Here's some of the families you find in the community. Again, a couple from Mexico, very happy that they have an apartment there with running water, because the little towns they visited in, they have to walk a mile or two to some body of water in order to bring it back to use in the household. And then here's a stoop in front of the housing project with mixed families and ethnic groups hanging out in a late summer afternoon, enjoying themselves. And the young lady taking her daughter to a little plastic swimming pools they sell at Target and Walmart. In fact, there was one house that had a bigger plastic swimming pool, another one that was about 3 or 4 feet high. They actually moved it into the front room. And you'd go to see them, there's a swimming pool in the front room. I mean, these kinds of things just crack you up. And you're expecting one thing and something else pops you in the face. This is part of the ethnographic experience. Here we have the schools. The principal there, Ronquillo, lived in the projects. He and his brother, very tall Chicano, he's about 6'3", 6'4". And he got a scholarship to the University of Oregon. His brother was Manuel Ronquillo, a famous high jumper in LA City at that time, who went to USC. So both Ronquillos got a college education and came back. He came back as a teacher and eventually vice principal, but here he is at his old alma mater, Roosevelt High School, and as principal. And these are my research assistants, Bibi and Norma. Norma right here next to the Rough Rider symbol. Bibi is a black Chicano. He grew up in the projects, but he's a Chicano. Physically he looks black, but he's actually a Chicano. And the funny thing about it, when they have prison riots, because he has done some time in jail, he said all the Chicanos, they're fighting the blacks, go into his cell and say, Bibi, stay here, everybody knows to not mess with you. And they take off and start beating, thumping other people's heads down the jails and maybe the yards or wherever else it might be. So it's an interesting phenomenon. Now he's working, BB, with LA City's anti-gang program. He's one of those street counselors. So he's another example of somebody who's had that street experience, matured out, and can be used as a street counselor. And for the 30, 40 years that I'm familiar with anti-gang programs in LA City, they regularly use seasoned street people to help as street counselors. Some of them turn out to be kind of, they backslide into the life they once led, but most of them are pretty serious about doing a good job in helping these kids. And we use the phrase to accelerate maturing out. Eventually some of these guys wise up and grow up, and what we want to do is get young kids to grow up that much faster and realize how senseless and useless this life of antisocial crime and deviance is. Here's the police departments that patrol the area. Housing police, campus police, and LAPD. I always marvel at how in the hell are we going to have so many damn police departments? Why can't we just have one in different subsections of the larger entity that's the police department? So these are very well loved by the students because they're campus cops, right? They're always there rubbing shoulders with students. What's amazing, the housing police, they patrol on these bikes as late as 2 in the morning. And the people in the community love them. Even though they bust people and send them to jail and all that stuff, but the parents are very supportive of them because these guys, when their kids are misbehaving, they tell the parents, this sucker's over here jiving around again. Didn't I tell you, blah, blah, blah. And they want to, do something with their kids. That's amazing. These guys, they hate with a passion. In fact, during the 3 years I was there doing ethnographic work, and this is the honest truth, that community would swing wildly between a free crime zone to a war zone. Free crime zone because no cops would ever patrol there. If they did, someone would throw a rock at their car. If they left their car to chase somebody on foot, somebody would throw a firebomb in the car. If they're coming off the freeway in their motorcycle, people shot, didn't kill them, but seriously injured them, knocked them off their motorcycle. This kind of animosity was brought to the public's notice back in, when was O.J. Simpson? 90, 91, 92? Lieutenant Mark Furr, you remember?
Yeah.
Furman? He was involved in the riot back in 1978, right there in the housing projects, where he knocked down doors and arrested people and slapped people around. He's the one that made the racist comments about O.J., which discredited his claim that he found these gloves that belonged to O.J., right? You remember that one? If it doesn't fit, you must have quit. Johnny Cochran's famous line. Anyway, the violence in the community was reflected in Furman's actions in '78, and I was there from 90 to about 95 full time, and then I go back periodically, and they had 2 or 3 little riots, and one real big one, and they go around knocking head and taking people, and BB got arrested, and other people got shaken up. It's a crazy kind of thing. It goes out of hand, and usually there's about 8 to 10, maybe more police cars there. Like I told you, they don't go in there unless they're very strongly supported by each other. There was a big shootout between 2 gangs one time, Guatro Flats and TMC, the mob crew, and they were 4th Street here, and they were shooting at each other for about 20 minutes. High-powered weaponry, right? And the cops came there, waited till it subsided to come in. They didn't want to get shot. Smart move, I think, especially if you guys don't care if they shoot cops or not. So they come in and they begin to bring peace and order in the area. But that's the war zone. And then the other thing is that no cops at all. Guys dealing drugs. People from outside driving by and buying drugs for some of the street kids. I mean some of the young kids, the 13, 14, 15-year-old guys who are street, not necessarily just 13, 14 years old from the community. So the policing part of it is kind of like a real inconsistent part of the life of the street folks. Here's some of the vatos of today. And you can see by the style of dress how it's changed from the old Pendleton shirts, khakis, to the cutoffs and the bald head. This guy's a veteran. This guy was my poster boy for many years. He's on the front cover of my book. But just a few months ago, I found out that he was arrested for identity theft and sent to Lompoc Federal Prison. He's doing 14 years or 15 when it first started. And the reason I think it hurts me inside is because he wound up going to college, Los Angeles State, Cal State Los Angeles, got his BA, became a street constable, was working in conventional, anti-gang kind of stuff, but he also kept one foot in this life, street identity, getting credit cards and all that kind of stuff. So poor Duck, he's a Vietnamese, again, Vietnamese Chicano. His brother just got out of jail recently, and his name, of all things, Chino, right? Chicanos and their racism, all Asians, the main difference if you're Korean, Japanese, Vietnamese, Chinese, you're Chino. In fact, the other day I had a visit from one of my students here, Stephen Kim, who's Korean, but he's doing great social work now with the city of Santa Ana. And he and I laughed all the time. And that was what they referred to him. His nickname was Dopey, because he was heavy into drugs. But his other name, that they call him Chino, you know. And he sent me an email, he wrote to the bottom Chino, even though he complained with all his street gang members, friends, that, I'm not Chino, I'm Coreano. I say, okay, Chino, you know. This guy's Chino too. And I just saw him the other day at Father Boyle's thing. He was there with another veteran. In fact, he's in this book. I have a photograph of him here. I've known the guy for about 20 years now. Here's some teachers doing a workshop talking about the street culture, street kids, the socialization there. Parenting classes are extremely important. In the community that I've done research, the few classes that exist, the parents have benefited tremendously. They've enjoyed them, they've learned from them, they've applied the lessons. So it turns out to be a very, very worthwhile investment on our society. Whether we have enough of them and fund them fully to where they should be, that's another question altogether. I can state with some certainty that we do not give them the priority that we should. I mean, when we think of our country, we have about $650 billion a year we spend on the criminal justice apparatus. And I would say that's more for police and for prisons and for district attorneys and for courts. And of course we got to get rid of criminals, but you know, can we figure a way to deal with them early in life before they become criminals or hardcore criminals? Should learn about the authoritative approach. I write down my own little tidbits of wisdom and information, insights. Verbal rules consistently close in. This is one of the studies I conducted, the projects, titled the projects, the book, is that parents who had this kind of approach were less likely to have children to join the gangs. And I don't know if it concurs with your stuff, Greg, but I know you've done some very important, interesting work on families. Maybe at some point after we have a discussion, you could underscore some of the things that you found in your work. But anyway, the families that were most bereft of any kind of child rearing strategy are the ones whose kids fell into the holes of the street and stayed there. Now, I mentioned how time is important and how we could step in the lives of these youngsters in a certain time period, early in life, and take time away from them. That's why recreation is so important and part of the kind of strategy that I'm advocating. It's a balanced strategy. But another thing is the place. The place is usually motivated offenders, suitable targets, and an absence of capable guardians converge in certain times and places to increase the possibility of a crime known as hotspots. Okay, I've introduced something recently to go along with hotspots. Hotspots and hotheads. That's when you get into the vato loco, locura craziness of the streets. But hotspots are places people go to, a lot of drugs, a lot of action, the opposite sex, time to just get into a dating mode, a street dating mode, different altogether, but nevertheless a dating mode. And then you get into, we got to learn to ignore the political debates and just set up situations, social and personal outlets and conditions, buildings and safe houses. to get kids to think of other places to attend besides hotspots. And we could create our own socially active locations and intellectually stimulating games and instructions to sort of guide them. As a youngster myself, I benefited tremendously from the CYO, which I'll show you in a minute, and from the police department's DAPS, Deputy Auxiliary Police, and from different recreation programs that we had in the neighborhood that kept us busy, kept us in a particular place safe. And that is not happening with certain neighborhoods. We have examples where I worked back in the 1960s, the War on Poverty. We had a thing known as Teen Post. And also the NYC, which I didn't list up here. Teen Posts were nothing but a building or a complex of buildings and rooms where somebody would come in as the director of the Teen Post, hire people like me to be street counselors and to be teachers, to be coaches. And you have 40 or 50 street kids there doing something every day. That was the Teen Post. But in addition to that, they had the NYC, Neighborhood Youth Corps. It's not like America Corps today, or Clean and Green, where they would come to work the community and get minimum wage, 25 hours a week. So what better way to steal time away from kids and have them there under your guidance and supervision, plus give them a job to do things that would be to spruce up the neighborhood, to help older people. Lyndon Baines Johnson is often lambasted because of his getting us involved in Vietnam, even though Kennedy started the ball rolling and then Johnson just continued. But I want to just put a plug in for Johnson right now. He's the last president we've had that made a serious effort to deal with poverty, marginalization, and of course, as part of that reality, the street gangs. In LA, the street gang violence was seriously, dramatically lessened, okay? And particularly in the black population. You didn't even have the Crips and Bloods yet. But right after they got rid of these programs, bam, Crips and Bloods make their appearance, all right? So when I was lecturing to a South Central Los Angeles group back in the middle 80s, 20 years after this program was eliminated, and I was telling them, I worked in the Teen Post, it was great, blah, 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 and I said, well, how many, are there still Teen Posts around? Someone raised their hand, and they said, yeah, there are 5 left. From 135 to 5. And without going through a scientific analysis, I would tell you that has made a difference in terms of the low-income areas that have kids that grow up on the streets, in terms of stealing time away from them, putting them in places that would be more conventional, and so on. So that's an important part of the hotspots and what the Teen Post did back in the 60s. We have these hotspots and it explains it and all the other stuff that you can read on your own. Here's one of the Clean and Green things that's it's still in operation today. Let me go back to that. This one here is, these kids were in the community on a regular basis, and they were going around sweeping, cleaning, and keeping out of trouble and getting minimum wage. Very low, but nevertheless something. And most of them are like with no money anyway. Here they are cleaning up. That's an example of something that costs money, but man, the payoff in the long haul is going to be tremendous for these guys. I mean, that's just one small segment of the population. Let's go back to that again. Pretty straightforward information. Then you have the hotheads, the locals that I talked about. And that, believe it or not, that's only a small portion of the guys who are gang. Well, let me give you a quick statistic. Of any neighborhood that has gangs, only about 10 to 15% of kids who are gang age belong to the gang. So that means 80%, 85% do not belong to the gang. They may flirt with some of the gang-like things, the drinking, the drugs, and all the other stuff, but they do not belong to Cuatro Flats, or the Mob Crew, or White Fence, or Eloyo Maravilla, whatever the name of the gang is. And of those 10 or 15%, eventually most of them mature out, grow up, as I mentioned earlier. 70%. Jim Short from Washington State University a long time ago came up with that figure. And then in my research with the projects, I sort of found a figure that very closely approximates what he was saying. Meaning that, you know, the kids that get in there, first of all, aren't that many in the community. Second of all, they also eventually get out, or they're killed out, or they go to prison, you know, prison, and they leave in different kind of ways. They don't just wise up and mature out and become full-fledged, hard-working adults. So the notion of looking at reality, the streets as a hot spots, and looking at them as a contested area between gangs is important. And even though it's only a small portion of the youth in that area that are in there, they make an inordinate amount of noise and a lot of attention that they get. You know, it's you know, the people around there know right away. You got to walk very gingerly and know that you're in safe areas and there's safe people there, people that are using their heads instead of being hotheads. Here's some of the recreation that they have in the area. Male and female, the flag football. Again, as a kid, I benefited tremendously from that kind of social effort, intrusion into the reality there. These are the places. And here's some advice that I give in terms of the places or hotspots. Soften hotspots. Gangs no longer protectors of community, and that used to be a belief 50 years ago among Chicanos and even among blacks 30 years ago. The gangs were protectors of the community. They made sure outsiders did not come in and treat the women there, you know, like their fair game. They were protecting them. They felt that back then. They also didn't want people coming in, breaking into houses and doing all kinds of criminal things. So at one time, the gangs, when they started, had that kind of reputation. But that's changed tremendously. It's all just complete wild in the streets kind of thing. In the 1950s, besides the teen posts in the 60s, we had social clubs or car clubs in gang neighborhoods. That was right after the Zoot Suit riots of 1943. In the 40s and 50s, they tried to do something different. 10 years later, how about these gangs? Let's get them in something, in a social club, a car club. Let's see if we could sort of direct that energy and guide them in ways that they're more pro-social than anti-social. And this would involve some of the time dimensions that I mentioned earlier: parents, teachers, police. For a while there in Los Angeles, before we have the current anti-gang program back in the late 90s, early 2000 years, we had something known as alley bridges. I was a part of that committee that put it together. And their main focus was parents, teachers, and police to get on the same page, okay, on the youth in the neighborhood that were getting into gangs. It didn't work for a number of reasons. Mostly there wasn't enough money to really give each neighborhood adequate resources to combat the gangs there, even though they're a small portion of the population. But I think it's to me anyway, it's a philosophical point that has to be revisited and somehow or another planned a different way and implemented. Today, the new anti-gang program has elements of this, but it doesn't have a real hard fix on the parents, teachers, and police, something that I think is important in terms of the breakdown of social control. Okay, focus on places that need them the most. The teen post, I gave you an example already. Here's the Boy Scouts. And there's all kinds of other programs. I happen to be a member of the Catholic Youth Organization, CYO, which is right here. And that's yours truly on the boxing team. And the funny story about this, here's Jimmy Vigil, right? Diego Vigil. That was my name back then before I became ethnically relevant. And this is Johnny Gallardo. I'm from Santo Nino Community Center, which is downtown South Central. He's from East LA at Bronson House. My kid went to Harvard Law School as a lawyer in Washington, D.C., and I'm in the State Department. I'm proud of my kids. And this guy's son became the leader of the Mexican Mafia, okay, Svailon Gallardo. And my daughter's getting out of school here, literary journalism. I told her, this is a great story, the juxtaposition. Two individuals back in that time on the boxing team. And this guy was a tough guy from Bronson House. But every time we fought, we drew. And that means it was a draw, right? And I sometimes think they just did it to make each of us feel good. And, you know, the other one was as good as the other. But this is in there. But you know what the darn publishers did? They took this out. So nobody knows it's me. So I have to tell you. But anyway, these things made a major difference. For taking time away from me. Number two, teaching me how to defend myself. So much so that 20 years later, when I worked in the teen post, I'm teaching these guys how to box, right? And 20 years after that, I make a connection to talk to somebody from the Mexican mafia. And I didn't know who the guy was. And the guy who set it up said, yeah, this guy's at the tip, hierarchy of the Mexican mafia. And we go into a room and he looks at me and I look at him. He said, hey, Jimmy. And I said, hey, Jimmy. I was his youth worker in the 60s. And the first thing he tells me, where did you learn how to box? In other words, they were going to try to roll me or do something. But then he said, where did you learn how to box? So he had second thoughts about it. I mean, it sounds stupid to talk about something like that, physical violence. But believe me, it comes in handy when you're growing up on the streets. Especially if you have a kind heart of an artist like I do, all right? And you got, you're mostly afraid, your heart's pumping like this, and damn, you have no choice. If you can't slip out of the trap that you're in and run, then you got to throw blows. What did Freud say? Fight or flight? Fight or flight, right? Here's some new programs. I also belonged to the Woodcraft Rangers back then. They were a tremendous program. I call them the poor man's Boy Scout. Because you didn't have to buy the manual, you didn't have to buy the uniform. All you got was a little velvet ribbon, and you put feathers and badges on there as you accomplish certain goals that the Woodcraft Rangers would have you do. The funny thing about this is back in the early 50s, right? And I'm over at the California Endowment giving a presentation to about 500 people from throughout the community. And I'm talking about the importance of the Woodcraft Rangers and the CYO and the Deputy Auxiliary Police, blah, 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 those kinds of programs. And after it was over, this woman comes up to me. She said, the new director of the Woodcraft Rangers. She said, thanks you for the plug, and blah, blah, blah. So from there, we made a nice connection. She's invited me to a number of functions, and I give a few donations here and there. But it was a real nice, pleasant, warm feeling to know that somebody still remembered the Woodcraft Rangers and thought they would be worthwhile. The amazing thing about these guys, 15,000 kids in Los Angeles were supported by, I think, $2 million. But they're trying to expand and get more, because what they do is hire high school and junior college kids to be their counselors and mentors. So they start up here, and then these kids are dealing, these young college kids and high school kids are dealing with younger kids. And these are some of the younger kids that are learning skateboarding to the left, male and female. And also on the right, they get broken down bicycles and build them up into new Stingray lowriders. I mean, some nice ones. So this is a part of the after-school program. This is at Carver Middle School. You had a connection there, didn't you, Irene, at one time? Carver?
No.
You were supposed to have one.
Yeah.
But it never materialized.
Yeah.
That's a great middle school, because the principal, African-American, grew up in the area, very sensitive to these kinds of programs, and just opens the door completely to anybody who comes in and wants to do these kinds of things with students, because she knows that it can't help but help. You know what I mean? It's got to help. Now the third part of the equation, which I'm going to go through very briefly, and now you get up and do my little dance with my laser pin here, is the people that you put in contact with some of these kids. I've already talked about it with a time and place, but you could elaborate a little more about these people. And I think I mentioned a lot of different things that will make a difference. Just real quickly. You have number G, help gang-proof a child. You got a good mentor. We had a couple of good mentors. A black teacher in elementary school, Mr. Thompson. He used to swat us with his rubber hose, but he only did it once in your lifetime. He's never misbehaved after that. And we had a reunion for him about 10 years ago. He's retired, old, you know. And in fact, the funny thing about it, at that time, a friend of mine went to high school and got into track. He couldn't afford track shoes. So Mr. Thompson brought his track shoes and loaned them to the guy. The guy used them. And then after he was done, when I got to high school, I said, hey, man, I don't have track shoes. I can't afford to buy any. Well, I could afford to, but I didn't want to buy any because I wasn't good. I never broke a ribbon ever running, you know. So it was always second or third. So I said, loan me your track shoes. So I kept them, used them. And then I still had one left. I don't know how in the hell I still had it left. But I brought it to this reunion we had for Mr. Thompson. You know, he got a kick out of it. We had it in a box wrapped with a pink ribbon, the whole routine. Mm-hmm. Here's the facts that I gave you earlier. This is the gang in Pico Union Housing Project, Cuatro Flats, 1995. That's how many gang members there were. All right? And those who were like actively, those who were peripherally, you know, you could tell by how much time they spend there, who they spend it with, what they do. Just basic, little, simple questions. And these guys in the middle were the ones that were raising all the hell. And then 10 years later, where in the hell are they? Well, they're in prison, they're dead, they're married, and a number of them, you know, matured out with marriage and a work and all the rest that goes with it. So this is a sort of flies in the face of what law enforcement likes people to believe, almost like the movie with, what's his name? What's the name of that Peruvian guy that's Latino? Braca, or what is it? Blood in, blood out. He thought you're in the gang, that's it for life, which is baloney. You know, you get in there and you know, that sounds like if you're a teacher for life, that's not true. You become something else. You're not going to be a gang member forever. So this tells you, social scientifically, that that's not the case. And here we have former gang members, the streets counselor, something I mentioned earlier. Time, place, and people for a balanced strategy. Police, I tell them right to the face. I gave a lecture about 3 years ago to the Marriott Disneyland to about 1,500 cops. Okay, 2 big giant screens and PowerPoint. And I told them, you know, you guys have overburdened yourself for a solution to a problem that you didn't cause. You know, you're going to nip it at the bud. That's too late. Get it at the roots. Even former Sheriff Block and Gates, who just passed away, came out publicly in the early 90s before the King riots and said there are social economic roots to this problem. You know, poverty and marginalization, as I pointed out earlier. So we got to do something at that level, to the roots. And the cops, of course, don't like to hear that. They'd like to hear, like, go out there and beat these guys up, be gangbusters and all that kind. But I also made a terrible mistake in my presentation when I talked about socioeconomic strain theory, Merton and so on. And I said, you know, you could even be president of the United States without even doing anything, but you're rich. Bush Younger was the president then. And about 300 or 400 guys walked out right there. You know, they didn't wait for me to finish by saying, take the Kennedy family. When each of them reached the age of 21, they got $10 million. I wasn't trying to go left or right, liberal or conservative. I was just trying to point out a plain fact. When you have money, you know, you have an edge over everybody else. And Bush, what did he do besides being an owner of a baseball team? Which that in itself didn't make him. He wasn't successful at that either. I don't want to get in my soapbox right now. Please, pull me back. Okay, here we have some people of my friends on the left criticize me for this sort of boot camp because they see it as like an encroachment on low-income communities to make them do what they're already doing, being used as cannon fodder in all our wars, which goes back historically. But I know people that have worked there 24/7, and it makes a difference for some of these kids to have that kind of strict, authoritative approach. Okay, not authoritarian, but authoritative approach. So you know, I think it would work. Anything, even religion. If they could join a religious group and become religious, that's good enough. As long as they stop killing each other. Okay, boot camp and all kinds of other places and things we can do to make life better for a lot of kids. Human development trajectories, as I mentioned earlier, emotional, physical, social, and cognitive. All those developmental phases and how they unfold on the streets. In the book here, I mentioned how they unfold on the streets. And what we need to do is to sort of regain control and guide children in terms of their human development. These are some of the fun things kids do. There's the teachers, the fun teachers. I mean, think about it today. They're laying teachers off. And I joke with I laugh because my students today are unfortunately very apathetic. They don't raise hell, all right? They should. I said, how much do school teachers make in their starting salaries? What is it now, 35, 40,000? Is that about right? Okay. What do correctional officers make without a bachelor's degree? 60,000, 65,000? I worked at Chaffey College and I taught a lot of correctional officers. It's where they have all the prisons. And I said, something's wrong when you do that. You know, something's wrong. And the students don't give a damn. So that's sad too. They don't know how to raise hell the way we did. Here are more than a couple of role models for us. The president in Sotomayor, and Mark Ridley Thomas in the bottom, and Antonio Villaraigosa. I'm very disappointed with Antonio Villaraigosa. I've known him for a long time. I'm very happy with Ridley Thomas. He's been one of the beacons in the community for as long as I can remember. And I've known him about 30 or 40 years. And then that's the general. What's his name? Petraeus? General Petraeus, a Greek background. Another ethnic. Need for positive anchoring experiences. And there at the end we have me and Bibi. Carrots and sticks start early in life. Right? Prevention, intervention, suppression. Thank you. Any questions?
Yes, sir. We just say like the anti-gang strategy. Does it start with like the federal policy, like the war on poverty, or does it go with like the more grassroots movement?
The current one, or just the historical background?
I think if we're doing like 2010, like right now, like what would be the most effective way?
This is the most effective way, the balanced strategy. That's what I'm suggesting. We can't just have it one area suppression, which is, well, you know, I mentioned $650 billion a year in the criminal justice apparatus, and it's certainly not part of the welfare safety net, team post, CYO kind of effort, okay, or thrust. It's mostly apprehending people and putting them in jail and keeping them there for a long time. And after they say they're 30 years, it costs us about $1.4 million with just one person. So what's happening today is a mix, and I'm very pleased with at least the move the LA City has made in the direction. You know, Villaraigosa grew up in a gang area. He knows all kinds of gangbangers, and he knows that we need these kinds of programs. So he started it. It's real balanced, and what's good about it, Bibi, I was pleased to hear, has open lines of communication with law enforcement. He could talk to them, and they could talk to him. If there's something that's brewing and it's going to be turned out in a negative, destructive way, he could tell them, hey, these guys are getting all worked up over here. This needs some more patrolling, sort of keep a lid on it. And that rapport and interaction never existed until the present program was put together. Now I understand from other sources that that program is running out of money. But that was a real enlightened effort, particularly since Villaraigosa and Bratton, the former chief, he's gone now, were real tight. They got real close and they worked on the same page together. And that made a difference. That's why they started that program. But we need something more coherent and more funded. Again, it's tough to talk about something well funded in this day and age. But we got to do something different. I mean, it's just, I mean, I would be the first one to line up for the suppression approach if it worked, but it hasn't. And then I'd be the first to line up for prevention. If it didn't work, then I'd have to step aside and let other people take over. Yes, Greg?
So you barely mentioned K-12 education.
Yeah.
Wouldn't a higher quality K-12 education
Absolutely.
environment solve a
Absolutely.
lot of the problems that you're...
Right. Well, I said a long time ago and wrote in a piece I did for the Harvard Educational Review that we need something. In fact, I forgot to elaborate on the war on poverty. Head Start. That's the only thing that remains. But I suggested a long time ago, in addition to Head Start, we got to get kids in elementary school and get smart in the early elementary years, and then middle schools. What was the way I broke it down? Head Start, Get Smart, forget, I had it all down real cute, you know, the little litany. And yeah, elementary K to 12 is extremely important. That's the foundation. And I didn't emphasize it, I'm sorry to say, but I certainly agree with you. That's where a lot has to be done. Yes?
I was thinking the same thing as I was listening. I was thinking this concept of academic press and how in K-12 settings, when some work that came out of the University of Chicago, that in these very low income areas with students whose life chances have been compromised and they haven't had access, that really schools becoming a place that really keep academic press as a focus. So really focusing on academics and learning can really become a support. But I have a question about the person who I think worked with you at some point, and I think you said, you know, went on and got his bachelor's degree and then has recently been arrested for. And I'm trying to understand like what that story can tell us, because partly I feel like, you know, here he had intervention, support, and all these structures, and yet ultimately when those were taken away,
No, he didn't have those. He became part of the outreach to be an intervention. But he never himself experienced or benefited from intervention. He did it mostly on his own. I mean, he just, you know, he went through all his gang years without ever being apprehended, putting time in jail. But he was a DL guy. DL means down low.
Okay.
He knows how to.
So I guess that tells us something about, so there's these different levels
Right.
within gangs, right? And that we have to think about providing different kinds of targeted interventions.
Right.
And yeah, I was just kind of curious about his story, because it made me wonder, like, if he had gotten support and intervention, then
Would that be
at
enough?
what point do you see that fading?
Right.
And then,
Right.
and can it? Because if you're living in these environments where you have all these social pressures.
Right. Well, Beatty, he did 10 years in San Quentin for a murder. And it was a murder in self-defense, but he didn't have a good lawyer, so he spent 10 years. But he's been out for 30 years. But he periodically backslides. Okay, I had to go to Kingman, Arizona to get him out of a fix there. They didn't believe he was from Los Angeles because he was caught in the car with this other guy who had cocaine. He was taking it to Georgia. So I went to testify in court saying, no, he's from LA, man. Because they thought he was just like from Georgia. You know, black guy must be from Georgia, he's from LA. So he got out of that one, then later he got apprehended for another one where he was carrying a gun in his community. You know, which is stupid, of course. They did another year for that. So he periodically backslides. You know, this is a life he's led all his, since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. It's part of him. So when I said that people mature out, I also said that people backslide. So there's a lot of that with some individuals. And I wish I had the neat, tidy academic explanation for it. But there's none that I know of. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm sort of from this type of background.
Right.
I'm from Detroit, and like maybe 5 people graduated from my high school.
Right.
And so, you know, when I think of my growing up, you know, there was no thought of education, and actually the street that I grew up on, you can't drive down on that street, or they'll actually, if you want to buy drugs.
Right.
And I feel like the police don't go on that street. And I feel like the police, they should say, you know, this is our territory, this is America, and make it a priority. And if they say, you know, if they come back and then they leave a few people, they can, you know, if they reestablish their presence again,
Right.
it'll change the whole environment. And there was no such thing as after school programs.
Right.
I never seen an after school program. And I feel like I don't know, my thinking is if there's an after school program and if there was some type of presence, then, you know, I mean, if you prioritized, what would you say would probably be priority number 1? If there were only one thing that you could.
Well, what I would say is Head Start and follow up on that. Gary Ortfield and others came up with this follow through. You know, I mentioned, you know, Head Start, Get Smart, Be Smart, and Stay Smart. You know, the high school is to stay smart. So I would say early prevention. Head Start is one area to begin, because Head Start is a very comprehensive program. It's not just, you know, teaching them what their ABCs are and stuff like that. Parents are involved. They get constantly. They do a real kind of more or less complete programming for the children and the parents to get on the same page of what it means. And then part of that, the second priority, would be what Bush announced in his first term, no child left behind. I think the key is reading, okay, in terms of the schools. And I would make it a priority for every kid to learn how to read. And to get the community colleges in the area and hire the students there to be the mentors and tutors and reading teachers. When I taught elementary school, I had a technique that I used in a couple of instances where I had a student tell me a story, and I wrote down the story. All right? And then I had, artwork done by an artist to put this person in the story, something about their life. And then I made their own personal book. And I used that to read to them when I got a chance. And little by little, the word sight technique took over where they began to recognize some of these words. At that time, we weren't doing much phonetics, and it was word sight reading. But now we have so many more sophisticated ways of doing it. But I would make No Child Left Behind, the reading part of it, priority.
And one other thing, I totally agree with you when you say anything helps. And actually, the churches are great because they don't leave.
Right.
The other programs end or whatever.
Right. No,
churches
absolutely correct. This one guy I was meeting with this week, Sid Martinez, the co-author with Victor Rios. Victor Rios is at Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara, and Sid Martinez is at Sacramento State, sociology. And he did his dissertation in South Los Angeles at a Catholic church in Watts. And the whole role of the church, when it was all black and then it became all Mexican, very interesting transformation. But one of the things he said, the church, inside the church, they have like statues of famous black saints, as well as some of the early parishioners there. So it's a combination black and brown church, even though historically it was more, historically it was more white way back when, but then it became black and then now it's becoming brown. And that church had a tremendous impact on the population to this day. So Sid Martinez talks about it in a very positive way, even though I know he's probably not a church-going Catholic anymore, okay? Like the rest of us, you get a certain age, you don't go anymore. You just have those beliefs and that's it. But I think the early years in Head Start would make a difference. And in any kind of recreation and educational program, time, stealing time, create new places for people to go, and then get them involved with people that are positive role models. I was fortunate, and a lot of other people were fortunate too. And what you do is get those role models and you multiply them. You go out and look for them. I mean, each of the areas of South Central LA has a bunch of great athletes. And those athletes could be commandeered to become part of a youth program, teaching them the discipline required to be an athlete, the clean living habits, that go with it. No drinking, no alcohol, blah, blah, blah. So that to me, and essentially, I guess, is the bottom line. I hate that phrase, but the ultimate point that I want to make is that we need a balance: prevention, intervention, as well as suppression. I'm not against law enforcement; we need it, but we certainly can aid ourselves better in the long haul. It's going to cost us, but it's either we pay now or we pay later, because it's costing us a lot of money right now. The prison situation is bad. In fact, just people on their own that are leaders are cutting back on it because they know it's just completely bankrupt, lumping us as a nation. As the state particularly, since we are the ones with 3 strikes and we think, that's the solution. Any other questions? Yes?
And Michelle Fine talks about the unholy trinity, the taking away of money from education, and then it goes into prison systems, and then you get these towns that are completely supported by the criminal justice system. How amenable are we to anything besides suppression when we have such an economy based on suppression?
I don't know. I know that Sheriff Block and Chief Gates, almost 20 years ago, at least made the first step in the direction of acknowledging that they cannot solve the problem alone, that there are social and economic roots to it. But somehow or another, Block died, Gates got voted off, and then we have to sort of we have to reinvent the wheel and go through it all over again. But I often underscore the importance of balance in how we raise our children in our society. Unfortunately, people that are well-heeled in more affluent areas, once they left the city, they pulled the plug on it. And you had like white flight and suburbanization of Southern California, and they feel they don't want to support these things anymore, not knowing that they are supporting them in another way, in a more negative way with prisons. Ruth Gilmore has written a book called Golden Gulag about the same issue of prisons and education. So it's a very interesting phenomenon, and you know how money from one thing goes to something else, because people are more inclined to think punitively, and particularly if it feeds into their racism. And they know these people can't really behave properly because it's in their blood. So why now? Don't even worry about trying to make corrections. Just put them away now. You know, that's sad, but it's fortunately very true.
We're
I guess-
a little bit over our time now.
Pardon me?
We're a little bit over our time now, so
Okay.
why don't we kind of stop formally, and then if people want to.
Yeah, if they want to stick around, I'll be happy to stick around within reason, because I also have some obligations.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much. I need some water for one thing.